All right, we're breaking out of our regular programming to go live to Madrid now, where the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is speaking. Let's listen in.
The global economy. As Turkey, we hope and pray that there will be not a loser in the establishment of a fair peace process. We were inspired and we became optimistic with the initiation of the Istanbul process, and we have to strengthen those endeavors. Turkey is assuming a responsibility, and we are an ally that can speak to all of the parties and that can share the burden. And I know that this role played by Turkey as an ally is being appreciated within NATO. And we were very happy to observe that once again. Through our contacts here, ever since the beginning of the war, we've managed to voice our priorities once again, such as the diminishing of the humanitarian crisis due to the conflict and the initiation of a peace process through ceasefire once and for all. I have shared our contributions to the UN plan in order to take out the cranes at the Ukrainian harbors and ports within the Black Sea. A quartet mechanism which will be established in Istanbul hopefully very soon under the auspices of the United Nations with the participation of all of the stakeholders. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, one of the most important documents that drew the most attention of the international community was the new strategic concept that we had approved yesterday. Back in the year 2010, the strategic concept was accepted as a result of the Lisbon summit, and this new strategic concept will be replacing that. And this document is once again underlining the significance of the fundamental principles and the values of NATO and the principles of solidarity for the future. This is a vision set forward in order for the alliance to adapt itself to the changing threats and security environment of the future. Turkey is celebrating its 70th anniversary to the participation in NATO. And with the contributions that we have paid, we have always moved in full compliance with the spirit of the alliance. And undoubtedly, we will be one of the allies of this platform that will have a say in the future vision of our alliance. In the strategic concept, terrorism is being acknowledged as the most severe asymmetrical threat, and the underlining of the NATO's resolve to fight against terrorism in all forms and in all types for the future is very significant. But this resolve should not remain only on paper. In actuality, we shouldn't make a distinction whatsoever between any of the terrorist organizations, and we have to sustain our fight against terrorism in full solidarity. During my statements at the sessions and during my bilateral meetings, I have repeatedly signified as to how important this issue is for Turkey. And I said that this is not a problem only for us all, but also for the NATO allies in its entirety. The murder organizations that are trying to derive benefits out of the lives and out of the blood of the innocent civilians are our common adversaries. The weapons that are being used against us today can also be used against other allies. Nobody can guarantee otherwise. History has shown us over and over that if we fail to observe the situation for what it is, these negligences will come back to us in the form of very fatal threats. In the last couple of days, we have seen terrorist organizations such as PKK and its affiliates which demonstrate an unprecedented reaction without considering anything else, and it's a clear confirmation as to what I'm talking about. It's just like a malignant tumor that is growing every day, and it's threatening social peace, stability, and security, and that we have to get rid of this tumor once and for all. We have very strongly underlined the message, and we conveyed this message strongly, that we want our allies to support us not only through words, but also through actions. And we've had the opportunity to watch a video where we have shown Turkey's long-lasting struggle against terrorism, which is very resolved and which is very committed. Thus, the bloody faces of PKK, PYD, FETÖ, and Daesh had been shown to all of our interlocutors. Where we stand today, we have to see this fact for what it is. If we want to protect the safety and the convincing nature of NATO as the allies, we have to combat against all forms of terrorism in a very clear sense. We have to be consistent and we have to be very sincere in terms of the steps that we take forward. Stopping financing of terrorism and stopping terrorist organizations from recruiting new members are two indispensable parts of this fight against terrorism. Almost for the last 4 decades, we have been fighting terrorism, and we have lost thousands of lives in the hands of terrorism. And as such a country, we can no longer tolerate lingering on. Within the framework of Sweden and Finland's application for NATO membership, we have experienced certain processes where we've managed to put Turkey's red lines forward quite clearly. Ever since the first day, we have always talked about our concerns, and we've talked about the issues that we were very sensitive about. We were always constructive, yet we were always resolved. On Thursday, under the facilitation of Secretary General, we got together with the leaders of Sweden and Finland within the framework of summit. The memorandum that we had signed altogether is a beacon which shows us that Turkey's concerns had been appreciated and understood. Of course, this is a beginning. This is an inception. It's an invitation. But what matters most is to keep the promises that were committed. From this moment on, we will be closely monitoring the implementation of the issues which were recorded within this memorandum, and we will take the necessary steps forward accordingly. Distinguished members of the press, we shouldn't think that diplomacy is a zero-sum game where one side always loses and the other side always wins. On the contrary, we have to believe and remain committed to the fact that diplomacy is the shortcut, is the most guaranteed path towards the common interests and common benefits that we need to achieve. This memorandum that was signed between Turkey, Sweden and Finland requires us to have this perspective whilst we are analyzing the developments. And that's how I believe it's going to be. With no doubts, this memorandum is a diplomatic triumph that was accomplished after a very trying period of negotiations for Turkey and for our nation. With the trilateral memorandum, we are going to observe a full cooperation in fighting against PKK and its affiliates. We will see full solidarity in fighting against all forms and all types of terrorism that would reveal themselves. A commitment that no longer a support would be provided to PYD, YPG and FETÖ. Also, a pledge to increase cooperation with the eradication of embargoes imposed upon us in the defense industry and the elimination of restrictions. A pledge provided by Sweden and Finland that they were going to revisit and tailor their local legislations and their implementations in fighting against terrorism and defense industry exports. There are going to be concrete steps taken forward for the extradition of terrorist criminals. Sweden already pledged the extradition of 73 terrorists to Turkey. There was a pledge about the banning of revenues collected by PKK and its affiliates and the recruitment of new members and the investigation of such attempts from now on. And we have received strong and resolved guarantees that terrorist propaganda against Turkey will be stopped once and for all. In order to examine the implementation of these pledges, we have decided that we are going to establish a common mechanism in order to welcome different stakeholders from different parties. Finland and Sweden, including PESCO and other European Union security mechanisms, will support Turkey's full partnership in the widest sense possible. From the first day on, we have always been talking about our sensitivities, and all of those sensitivities had been stated clearly in the trilateral memorandum. Along with Turkey and NATO, Finland and Sweden have both become very triumphant in the signing of this memorandum as well, along with the people of these countries. Every concrete step that we take forward in fighting terrorism will contribute tremendously to the peace, prosperity, and security of these nations. Distinguished members of the press, during the summit sessions and within the margin of this gathering, I've had the chance to get together with many of the heads of states and governments, and within that framework, we have undertaken our Quartet Summit with the participation of NATO Secretary General Mr. Stoltenberg, the President of Finland, Mr. Niinisto, and the Swedish Prime Minister, Ms. Andersson. And right next to our summit, we've had bilateral meetings with the President of France, Mr. Macron, the Prime Minister of the UK, Mr. Boris Johnson, the EU Council President, Mr. Michel, the President of the United States, Mr. Biden, and the Federal Chancellor of Austria, Mr. Nehammer, the Prime Minister of Spain, Mr. Pedro Sanchez, the Federal Chancellor of Germany, Mr. Scholz, as well as the Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mr. Rutte, the President of Romania, Mr. Iohannis, and President Zain Yoon of South Africa. And during these meetings and during these discussions, we've had the chance to casually talk to many leaders, including the leader of Hungary and Montenegro. During these discussions and during these casual talks, we've managed to talk about the developments taking place in Ukraine with our counterparts, and we have exchanged our opinions within the framework of the agenda of the alliance, as well as we've managed to talk about different issues within our bilateral agendas in different dimensions. As the fifth country providing the highest, one of the highest contributions to NATO, having the second largest army of the organization, and that has been a member of the NATO organization for the last 70 years, Turkey is undoubtedly going to have a say in the future of NATO, just like it did in the past. And it's been clearly observed by all of the participants. While we shall be leading our independent foreign policy and sovereign foreign policy, we will keep on providing all forms of contributions and support to NATO within the spirit of alliance, and we would like to see the same solidarity from all of our allies. I hope and pray that this will be the turning of a new tide that we have observed within the Madrid summit. With these thoughts in mind, I hope and pray that this summit will yield the most auspicious results for all of us, and I would like to salute you all with love and respect.
Mr. President, James Bays from Al Jazeera English. You talked about your plans for a deal to get the grain out of Ukraine. Can you tell us how that plan is going to work, how close you are to a deal, and when you plan next to speak to President Putin?
Whether it be Mr. Putin or Mr. Zelensky, I believe this weekend or the beginning of next week, we will sustain a telephone diplomacy. There is already a roadmap which is emerging, and after having talked to them, as soon as possible, we are going to render this corridor, if you will, operational. We have about 20 ships docked in the region, and with these ships, we are going to transport the Ukrainian grain out of the ports, and through re-exporting, third countries will be supplied with the Ukrainian grain.
Merhaba, Hümeyra Pamuk, Reuters haber ajansı. I'm going to ask
Hello.
Turkish because that's my mother tongue. Efendim, biraz önce Biden kendi basın toplantısında F-16'larla...
Biden, in his press meeting a minute ago, talked about F-16 fighter jets, and he said he discussed this with you and that he supports their sales, but he's awaiting an approval from the Congress, and he was sure that that approval would be granted. Now, did he give you any promise that he would work with the Congress? In recent years, in Washington, D.C., in the Congress, there's this general tendency against Turkey. Are you sure that F-16s will be sold to Turkey? And did you give you a timeline? And secondly, don't hurry, please. Let's deal with this first.
I'm going to answer your question right away. The parliaments are the places where difficult times are observed. And here, Mr. President said that he would take the necessary steps forward in his capacity. Of course, we're not only talking about the Democrats, we also have the Republicans. A large delegation from Turkey was in the United States. They talked to the Democrats as well as the Republicans in Congress. And we've had a bilateral meeting last night with President Biden. In the aftermath, our delegations will be again sent to the United States to talk to the Republicans in order to cultivate their support. And if that shall happen, I believe Mr. Biden's sincere efforts will enjoy a significant amount of support from Congress. And I believe, without any further delay, I'm going to be sending forward another delegation.
Thank you. My second question. As part of the deal made with Sweden and Finland, how will it be implemented from Turkey's perspective? Because Turkey expects these two countries to take some steps. If you see that those steps are not taken, and when it comes to ratifying that text, would Turkey or could Turkey use its right for a veto again?
No repetition is required. If we don't have this ratified by our parliament, there is no way out. First, Finland and Sweden will have to deliver the pledges that they were committed to within the memorandum. They have to do what is necessary. On the occasion that they deliver their pledges, we will send this memorandum to our parliament for ratification. But if the pledges will not be delivered, of course, it won't be possible for this memorandum to find its way to the parliament. You know that Macedonia managed to be a member of NATO. How long did it take? 20 years. 11 plus 9, 20 years. And this is not a process that can be easily finalized. I want it, so I'll have it. No, it's not the case. Sweden knows this, and Finland knows this too. And within this understanding and within this consciousness and awareness, if you will, they will take these steps forward, hopefully. PKK, PYD, YPG, and FETÖ, all these terrorist organizations will have to be eradicated. They need to be wiped out. And they have to carry out the legislative amendments in order to do that.
All right, we're going to dip out of that live press conference you were listening to there by the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He too speaking at the NATO summit this afternoon. More details there from Erdogan of the deal that was reached between Turkey and Sweden and Finland over their membership of NATO in exchange for the extradition of Kurdish individuals to Turkey. Erdogan saying there that Sweden has promised to extradite 73 people to Turkey. Well, listening to that with me was our foreign affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. And Doug, on that deal reached with Sweden and Finland. I wonder what you thought of Erdogan's language there, because he was talking about the need for those two countries to stand up against terrorism, very critical of those Kurdish groups there. That all rather controversial, isn't it, at a NATO summit?
Yeah, well, look, no surprise here. Turkey has always been the problem ally in NATO, the overarching, the obstructionist, if you will. I mean, a few years back, it blocked the appointment of there was talk of having a Dane take over NATO, become the Secretary General, and that was nixed because Turkey had objections. Why? Because at the time, you'll remember, was a Danish cartoonist who had drawn controversial cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan took great exception to that, to the point of saying he didn't want a Dane to be the head of NATO. His will was served, and once again, look, he basically had NATO by the throat here. You know, when it was first announced, and Biden spoke about this earlier, that Finland and Sweden were going to join, everyone just assumed, they were going to be the next, a clear path. They would be the next members of NATO, bringing it to up to 32 members from 30 members. And then you had Turkey walk into the fray and basically projecting its power, because one veto is enough to basically put the kibosh on the whole thing. So Turkey's potential blocking vote would have meant, up until the last minute, that Finland and Sweden could not join. It only was agreed on Tuesday night. And why? Because a deal was reached, an agreement was reached, even if NATO is saying there was no quid pro quo, nothing was specifically offered to Turkey beyond pledges by Finland and Sweden to, as Recep Tayyip Erdogan describes it, to stop supporting Kurdish militant groups on their territories. That he saw as a red line, and also to lift a ban on the sale of some types of arms to Turkey. So those were the conditions that basically Recep Tayyip Erdogan got what he wanted. And at the same time, we also heard Joe Biden speaking earlier about, he basically supports the sale of older F-16 jet planes to be and modernizing the existing ones in the Turkish fleet. Erdogan walks away from this summit with quite a spring in his step. He ends up, sort of getting what he wanted. We'd been assured that Turkey's objections would not obstruct would not ultimately block Finland and Sweden joining, that there would be a resolution reached. We don't actually know what was pledged at the end of the day, what concrete pledges he got. And he's also, Erdogan held out the possibility that if these guarantees are not fulfilled, if Finland and Sweden, in his view, continue to support these groups as he sees it, at any time he could drop his support again with the snap of a finger. So, it's a triumphant Erdogan calling it a diplomatic victory.
And at the same time, there's a suggestion there from Erdogan that he may be in touch with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin over these blockades on Ukrainian ports that struggle to get grain out of there. I suppose that an indication of the fact that more than some other NATO members, Erdogan has a degree of a relationship with Vladimir Putin. Yeah, no,
they have a relationship. They're in talks. The UN, Turkey, and Russia are in these murky talks, so we don't really know much about what's actually being talked about, to quote unquote to end, to allow grain exports from the Black Sea ports, Ukraine's Black Sea ports, to finally get safe passage through the Black Sea and get to the areas, especially in the African continent, where that food is absolutely desperately needed. Here's the thing, though. Ukraine has expressed great skepticism about those talks really coming to fruition. Even if we saw, as we did today, an announcement that a ship with 7,000 tons of grain has left a port in Berdyansk in the Sea of Azov, making its way through a safe corridor, that's probably a one-off. There's been no deal in place to lift what is essentially a Russian blockade of Ukraine's Black Sea ports and the grain exports from those ports. Now, Erdogan loves the position he's in right now because he's able to play it both ways. He's playing Moscow, he's playing the West, he's a NATO ally, but he's also in the past, he's bought weapons from Russia, the S-400 system. He doesn't have great relations with Putin, but he has been extremely savvy in being able to use his pivotal geographical position and as a member of NATO, a prominent member of NATO, in order to sort of push his own agenda of restoring sort of Turkey's influence on the world stage, its regional influence, its historical influence, his idea of restoring the former grandeur of the Ottoman glory of the past. So For his supporters, he's been very successful at that. But once again, like I said, very unlikely these talks with Russia are actually going to come to fruition. Ukraine doesn't trust Russia's word on any of this and any deal that it might sign to get grain exports out, because at the end of the day, from Ukraine's standpoint, and from the standpoint of a lot of the Western allies that we saw, NATO and the G7, Russia is cynically using this blockade to push its own war ambitions, to get what it wants, i.e. the lifting of Western sanctions, that Putin doesn't give a hoot about getting that food to the people who need it and feeding, food-needy people facing high acute food insecurity, as the World Food Program says. He's merely using them as pawns. He's using the grain and the blockade as leverage to push his ambitions, his goal. And Erdogan is right there, ready to exploit that ambiguity or that cynical foreign policy position on the part of Russia, as long as it means that Turkey is being seen as being in the heart, right front and center of global diplomacy at a critical moment for both Russia and the West.
Douglas Herbert, thanks very much indeed for your analysis on the programme.